The Queen Anne's Revenge was not built to be a pirate ship. It began its existence as La Concorde, a French slave trading vessel that crossed the Atlantic carrying human cargo and legitimate commerce. Yet within a matter of months, this converted merchantman would become the most feared warship in the Western Atlantic, not through superior design or construction, but through the vision of one man who understood how to transform a merchant hull into an instrument of terror. Under the name Queen Anne's Revenge, we understand a ship that ruled the waters between the Carolinas and the Caribbean for barely 18 months, yet left a legacy that would define the golden age of piracy. A vessel whose very silhouette on the horizon was enough to make merchant captains strike their colors without a fight. This was not the largest ship to sail under the Black Flag, nor the fastest, nor the most heavily armed by the standards of naval warfare. But in the hands of Edward Teach, known to history as Blackbeard, it became something more dangerous than any frigate. A floating fortress that could blockade entire ports, capture prizes with impunity, and project power across vast stretches of ocean. To understand why Queen Anne's Revenge mattered, we must first understand what it was, how it was built, and why a converted slaver became the ultimate expression of pirate power in the Age of Sail. The ship that would become Queen Anne's Revenge was launched in 1710 as La Concorde, a French merchant vessel built in Nantes for the transatlantic slave trade. She was classified as a frigate-built merchantman, meaning she borrowed elements of warship design while serving commercial purposes. Her original specifications were typical of large merchant vessels of the period. La Concorde measured approximately 31 meters in length, with a beam of roughly 7.5 meters. Her displacement was estimated at around 300 tons, substantial for a merchant vessel, but modest compared to true warships. She was built with 3 masts in the standard configuration: foremast, mainmast, and mizzenmast, all carrying square sails optimized for crossing the Atlantic with the prevailing trade winds. Her hull was constructed primarily of oak, a material that offered the necessary strength for oceanic voyages while remaining workable for shipwrights. As a slave ship, La Concorde was designed with specific features that would later prove valuable in her second life. She had substantial cargo capacity, reinforced holds for restraining human cargo, and multiple deck levels that could accommodate large crews. Her armament was light, typically 16 to 20 guns, enough to deter small privateers, but insufficient for serious naval combat. For 7 years, La Concorde operated in the slave trade, making multiple voyages between France, West Africa, and the Caribbean. She transported enslaved Africans, sugar, tobacco, and other colonial goods. It was profitable, legal commerce under the French flag. This changed in November 1717 off the island of St. Vincent in the Caribbean. Edward Teach, already an established pirate operating under the command of Benjamin Hornigold, encountered La Concorde during one of her routine voyages. The French vessel was returning from Martinique, carrying a cargo of enslaved people and supplies, escorted by a small crew weakened by disease and desertion. Contemporary accounts suggest the capture was relatively bloodless. Teach's sloop, likely the Revenge, approached under false colors. By the time La Concorde's captain recognized the threat, it was too late. Outgunned and outmaneuvered, the French crew surrendered after minimal resistance. What happened next reveals Teach's strategic thinking. Rather than simply plundering the cargo and releasing the ship, he recognized its potential. La Concorde was larger and more capable than any vessel he had commanded. Her size meant she could carry more guns, more supplies, and more men. Her design, while merchant in origin, could be modified into something formidable. Teach made his decision quickly. He would keep the ship, refit it, and transform it into his flagship. The enslaved Africans aboard were released or incorporated into the crew, a common practice among pirate companies that needed manpower regardless of origin. The original French crew was given the option to join or be set free in a smaller vessel. Some joined, others departed, carrying stories of the pirate captain who had taken one of France's finest merchant ships. Teach sailed his new prize to a secluded location where the transformation could begin. Converting La Concorde into Queen Anne's Revenge required both practical modifications and symbolic rebranding. Teach understood that a pirate ship was not just a vessel, but a weapon of psychological warfare. The first priority was armament. Historical evidence suggests Teach increased the ship's firepower dramatically. While La Concorde had carried 16 to 20 guns, Queen Anne's Revenge was eventually armed with 40 cannons, making her one of the most heavily armed pirate vessels of the era. This was an extraordinary number of guns for her size. By comparison, a Royal Navy fifth-rate frigate of similar dimensions typically carried 32 to 36 guns. Teach's decision to maximize firepower came at a cost. The ship would be slower, less maneuverable, and more difficult to handle in heavy weather, but the trade-off was worth it. The guns themselves were a mixture of calibers and types, salvaged from captured prizes. Most were likely 6-pounders and 9-pounders, cannons firing solid shot weighing roughly 3 to 4 kilograms. These were supplemented by smaller swivel guns mounted on the rails for close-quarters combat and anti-personnel work. The gun deck was modified to accommodate this increased armament. New gun ports were cut into the hull, structural reinforcements added, and the deck layout reconfigured so crews could work the guns efficiently. This was not professional naval architecture, but practical pirate engineering, functional if crude. Beyond the guns, Teach made other modifications. The hull was likely careened and cleaned regularly to maintain speed. Pirates depended on being able to chase down merchant prizes and escape from naval vessels, so hull maintenance was critical. The rigging was adjusted for better performance with the prevailing Caribbean winds. While we lack specific details, it's likely that Teach's crew, which included experienced sailors from multiple navies, optimized the sail plan for the kind of warfare they intended to wage: quick strikes, pursuit of fleeing merchants, and occasional retreats from superior forces. The ship's appearance was also weaponized. Teach understood that terror was as effective as cannonballs. He flew multiple flags, sometimes the black flag of piracy, sometimes false colors to confuse prey, and reportedly a custom flag featuring a skeleton holding an hourglass and spear, a symbol of death and time running out. The name itself was significant. Queen Anne's Revenge referenced Queen Anne of Great Britain, who had died in 1914, and suggested both legitimacy and vengeance. Whether Teach chose the name to mock British authority or to invoke the recent War of Spanish Succession when privateering was legal is unclear. What is clear is that the name carried weight.
What made Queen Anne's Revenge truly formidable was not just the number of guns, but how they were deployed tactically. The 40 cannons were arranged along both sides of the ship, allowing for devastating broadsides. A broadside from Queen Anne's Revenge could fire approximately 20 guns simultaneously, delivering between 60 and 80 kilograms of iron into an enemy vessel at close range. This was enough firepower to cripple or sink most merchant ships with a single volley. More importantly, it was enough to make resistance seem futile. When a merchant captain saw 40 gun ports staring at him, surrender became the rational choice. The tactical doctrine Teach employed was straightforward but effective. Queen Anne's Revenge would approach under false colors, often flying British or French flags. When within range, the black flag would be raised, a signal to surrender immediately or face annihilation. If the merchant complied, no violence was necessary. The cargo was transferred, valuables seized, and the ship released or burned depending on Teach's needs. If resistance was offered, a single warning broadside was usually sufficient. The psychological impact of 20 cannons firing in unison was overwhelming. Teach rarely needed to fight prolonged engagements. The threat alone was sufficient. The smaller swivel guns served a different purpose. Mounted on the rails and capable of being aimed quickly, they fired grapeshot or language, anti-personnel ammunition designed to cut down sailors on deck. These were used during boarding actions or to suppress resistance from ships that refused to surrender. Queen Anne's Revenge also carried stores of small arms, muskets, pistols, cutlasses, and boarding axes. Teach's crew numbered between 250 and 300 men at the ship's peak, an enormous complement that allowed him to overwhelm any merchant vessel through sheer numbers if necessary. But the true weapon was reputation. After several successful captures, the mere sight of Queen Anne's Revenge was enough to end fights before they began. Queen Anne's Revenge operated primarily in the western Atlantic, from the coast of the Carolinas south through the Caribbean. This was one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, where European goods flowed to the colonies and colonial products, sugar, tobacco, rum, and enslaved people flowed back to Europe. Teach's operational strategy was methodical. He would patrol known shipping routes, often near major ports like Charleston, Nassau, or Havana. When a sail appeared on the horizon, Queen Anne's Revenge would give chase. The ship's size and armament meant she could operate with impunity in most situations. Royal Navy frigates were rare in these waters, and colonial patrol vessels were typically smaller sloops or brigs that stood no chance against 40 guns. One of Teach's most audacious operations occurred in May 1918 when he blockaded the port of Charleston, South Carolina. For nearly a week, Queen Anne's Revenge and her consort vessels controlled the harbor entrance, capturing every ship that attempted to enter or leave. This was not typical pirate behavior. Most pirates struck quickly and fled. Teach, commanding what was effectively a small battle fleet with Queen Anne's Revenge as flagship, demonstrated that pirate power could challenge colonial authority directly. The blockade only ended when Charleston's authorities paid a ransom in medical supplies. Teach sailed away without firing a shot in anger, having humiliated one of Britain's most important colonial ports. This episode reveals the strategic advantage Queen Anne's Revenge provided. A smaller pirate sloop could harass individual ships. A vessel of Queen Anne's Revenge's size and armament could control entire stretches of coastline. A ship is only as effective as the men who sail her, and Queen Anne's Revenge required a substantial and skilled crew. At her peak, she carried between 250 and 300 men, an enormous number compared to merchant vessels of similar size, which might carry 20 to 30 sailors. Even Royal Navy frigates typically operated with crews of 150 to 200. This overcrowding was deliberate. Pirate tactics relied on overwhelming force during boarding actions. A large crew also allowed for multiple prize crews to be sent aboard captured vessels while maintaining sufficient manpower on the flagship. The composition of the crew was diverse. Contemporary accounts mention English, French, Spanish, African, and Caribbean sailors. Piracy in this era was one of the few multiracial, multicultural institutions in the Atlantic world. Ability mattered more than origin. The crew operated under a pirate code, a set of articles that governed conduct, divided plunder, and established discipline. While we don't have the specific articles used aboard Queen Anne's Revenge, typical pirate codes from this period included provisions for equal voting rights, shares of plunder based on role, compensation for injuries, and rules against fighting among the crew. Teach, as captain, commanded during battle and navigation, but major decisions, where to sail, which ships to attack, how to divide captured goods, were often decided by crew vote. This democratic element distinguished pirate vessels from both merchant and naval ships, where captains held absolute authority. The quartermaster, likely Israel Hands, who served as Teach's second-in-command, managed daily operations, enforced the code, and represented the crew's interests. This balance between captain and quartermaster prevented tyranny and maintained morale. Discipline was maintained through a combination of respect, profit-sharing, and, when necessary, violence. Teach cultivated a fearsome personal reputation, the burning slow matches woven into his beard, the multiple pistols, the theatrical displays of rage that kept his crew in line while simultaneously terrifying enemies. Queen Anne's Revenge lasted barely 18 months. In June 1918, while attempting to enter Beaufort Inlet in North Carolina, the ship ran aground on a sandbar and was abandoned. The circumstances remain disputed. Some historians believe it was a genuine accident, the result of poor navigation in unfamiliar waters. Others suggest Teach deliberately grounded the ship to reduce his crew size and keep a larger share of accumulated plunder for himself and a few trusted men. Archaeological evidence from the wreck site discovered in 1996 suggests the ship was heavily loaded when she grounded, consistent with a vessel laden with plunder. Artifacts recovered include cannons, anchors, navigational instruments, medical equipment, and thousands of smaller items. What is certain is that after grounding, Teach made no serious attempt to refloat the ship. Instead, he and a small group of loyal crew members took the most valuable plunder and sailed away in smaller vessels, eventually settling in North Carolina under a dubious pardon from the colonial governor. Queen Anne's revenge was left to the sea. 5 months later, in November 1718, Teach was killed in a naval engagement with British forces led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard. The death of Blackbeard effectively ended the threat his organization posed, but by then, Queen Anne's revenge was already gone.
Queen Anne's revenge never fought a major naval battle. She never sank an enemy warship or participated in a fleet action. By the standards of naval warfare, she was insignificant. But by the standards of piracy, she was transformative. She demonstrated that a well-armed pirate vessel could project power on a scale previously impossible. Before Queen Anne's revenge, pirates operated as raiders and opportunists. With her, they could blockade ports, control shipping lanes, and challenge colonial authority directly. The ship's reputation outlasted her operational life. For years after her grounding, merchant captains reported sightings of the vessel. Ghost ships that turned out to be ordinary merchantmen misidentified by terrified sailors. The psychological impact of Queen Anne's revenge persisted long after the ship itself was gone. From a tactical perspective, Queen Anne's revenge proved that converted merchant vessels could be viable warships when properly armed and crewed. This lesson was not lost on colonial governors and naval planners, who began arming merchant vessels more heavily and deploying larger patrol ships to counter the pirate threat. The ship also represented the peak of pirate power in the Atlantic. After 1718, the Royal Navy increased its Caribbean presence, colonial governments cracked down on piracy, and the era of massive pirate flagships came to an end. Smaller, faster vessels became the norm as pirates shifted from confrontation to evasion. Archaeological work on the wreck has provided invaluable insights into 18th century shipbuilding, pirate armament, and daily life aboard a pirate vessel. Artifacts include medical instruments that suggest a relatively sophisticated understanding of maritime medicine, navigational tools that demonstrate professional seamanship, and personal items that humanize the crew. The wreck site is now protected, and ongoing excavation continues to reveal details about the ship's construction and operation. Queen Anne's Revenge existed for barely 2 years as a pirate vessel, yet she occupies an outsized place in maritime history. This is partly due to her association with Blackbeard, one of history's most famous pirates, but it also reflects the ship's genuine significance. She was not purpose-built as a warship. She was not the product of professional naval architecture or state-sponsored construction. She was a slave ship, converted through practical necessity and strategic vision into something that could challenge the naval powers of the age. What made her effective was not superior design, but superior psychology. Teach understood that in the age of sail, reputation was a weapon as powerful as cannons. A ship that everyone feared didn't need to fight. Surrender became the rational choice. Queen Anne's Revenge proved that power at sea could be improvised, that a merchant hull with enough guns and the right reputation could control waters that navies struggled to patrol. She showed that piracy, when organized and properly equipped, could be more than theft. It could be a form of warfare. The ship's final resting place off the North Carolina coast serves as a reminder that even the most feared vessels are temporary. Ships rot, sink, or are abandoned. But the ideas they represent, about power, about fear, about what is possible when conventional rules are abandoned, those endure. Queen Anne's Revenge did not change naval architecture. She did not introduce new tactical innovations or revolutionize maritime warfare. But she demonstrated something perhaps more important, that in the right hands, even a converted merchant ship could rule the Atlantic if only for a moment. And in that moment, she became legend. Thank you for joining me on another voyage into the past. a place where facts blend with legend and long-forgotten names rise once more beneath the black flag. If you enjoyed the video, I'd truly appreciate a subscription, a comment, or a share. And wherever your journey takes you, remember this: history is often darker than legend.